Okay, with 78 people in the room on this budget day 2021. So I recognise that people may have other priorities in digging through the budget right now. We might make a start. Not to say that this isn't also a very important session on some very important matters for local government. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're all meeting and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and those Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders who may be with us today. So thank you very much. If we can click to the next slide, please, Aman. So look, today really is all about the panel discussion. As always, focusing on the wealth of knowledge that is being developed across the sector in this area of workforce planning, and particularly the links to the Gender Equality Act and the work that's being done there as well. So I will give you a brief update, then we're going to hear from 4 people in the panel, and hopefully we'll have some time for questions and answers. If you can please all turn off your microphones so that we don't get any feedback during the process. And if you've got a question that occurs to you, you can certainly pop that in the chat at any time, or we'll go to the open mic if we have time at the end. So thank you, Aman. So over to me. So as you're aware, there is a project control board. The project control board continues to meet on a monthly basis to set that direction, to understand what we're hearing from the sector, from a range of all of their viewpoints and from their members, and make any adjustments that we need in relation to the implementation approach. This is the one that's, you know, pretty exciting now because we're getting so many ticks across the board, and it's very exciting to see what you have all achieved since March the 24th, 2020, during a pandemic. What an incredible systemic reform to local government. So brilliant work, everyone. And here we are at stage 3B and stage 4. So look, we're continuing our focus on the strategic planning and reporting framework, but whilst it's largely complete and many of you are pretty much all of you are out there putting together the components of this very important piece of the architecture of the Act, we're continuing to provide the support as required in relation to that. We've got the working group on CEO remuneration, the staff code of conduct, and of course workforce planning, including gender equality. And those model financial documents are available on our site. And we've got the review of the content of candidate training, and we've just completed the survey, and we've got an over 10% response rate to that survey. So we're pretty excited about the validity of the results that we're getting in relation to that. And we hope to work through and make adjustments to the training package towards the end of July so that it's ready for the South Gippsland elections in October this year. And for everybody, just in case you haven't caught up, it's now available permanently online. So anybody can look at this training at any time, as opposed to in the 2020 elections, it only was put up online the 60 days before the nomination closes. So it's there as a resource at any time for the sector or anybody in the community to understand more about what it might be to be a councillor in Victoria. So I think you're all aware that the Gender Equality Act is now alive since the 31st of March, and there's some really key activities that you're all undertaking: audits, developing plans, doing gender impact assessments. But those audits that you're undertaking and those plans that you're developing will really feed so strongly into the workforce plan. It kind of does your work for you in relation to the gender inclusion and diversity components as they relate to gender in that workforce plan. So very much connected, and I hope that you're seeing the usefulness of not having to double up under the 2 acts. So this is a bit of a confusing one, but it does articulate that there is a strong interaction between the structures and the acts. You've got both of the ministers there and what are the strategies that have been approved through government policy. You've got some key departments, so the Local Government Victoria and the Office for Women. You've got the Public Sector Gender Equality Commission and the Gender Equality Act on the other side of the equation, and then how it all comes together in relation to the two acts there. So again, this just really reiterates that if you do acquit yourself under the Gender Equality Act, then the workforce plan is going to be easier from this perspective. But it's really important to think about, not just in relation to the Local Government Act, but also the Gender Equality Act. What are the other things that we might be doing in relation to promoting gender equality through the Act? And some of the things are already in place, but as we've always talked about, the process of implementation is continuous improvement. It's not tick a box, we've done it. And so there's things that you might want to come back to and put that gender impact assessment over to see if you're actually getting the best results from some of the policies that you've put in place. So whether that's the expenses policy, whether it's your governance rules, are they actually enabling women to effectively participate? There is certainly an opportunity to utilise the tools from the Gender Equality Act to see if you're getting the best outcomes for women in relation to either being a councillor or being in council as an organisation. So that's my very, very quick update, and I'm handing over to the panel, and I understand that that Tanya Kovac has got some limitations on her time, so I'll be very pleased to hand over to Tanya, followed by Tony, Leanne and Disa. So over to you, Tanya, and thank you so much for being here today.
Well, I'm pleased to say that I can actually stay with you for the whole session today and be around for the Q&A. So I wasn't anticipating being able to do that, but I can. So thank you so much for having me, LGV. I'm thrilled to be able to be with you. And can I please begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of all of the lands on which we're meeting. I think this is the most lands that I've presented to, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Lands were never ceded in battle or bargain, always was, always will be First Nations land. Today I am coming to you from my car in the unique way that we can now do in COVID-19. I've just walked out of the state budget lockup, and I'm pleased to report that there are some strong gender equity investments that are contained in that bid. Today I will be talking to you a little bit about the role that Gender Equity Victoria is playing to support the Commission for Gender Equality in the public sector's implementation and rollout of the Gender Equality Act, and give you some insight and tips about how to navigate this reform in an easy way for your organisations. I don't have long today, but it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's the start of a conversation with all of you. And I'm really pleased to let you know that GenVic works very closely with the local government sector through its relationships with the VLGA, and we're looking forward to deepening those relationships also with LGV as well. So to begin with, just to let you know, Gender Equity Victoria is the peak body for all gender equity organisations and practitioners and advocates across the state of Victoria. We provide advocacy support, training and development, and we also run a number of innovative projects. One of our projects has been the bringing together of a number of expert community sector-based gender equity practitioners to support the Commission for Gender Equality in the public sector. We are a formal member. Our Action for Gender Equality Partnership is a formal member of the panel of providers to the Commission to support the rollout of the Act. That means we can support any defined entity, any local government entity, in helping them reach compliance. Our special expertise is in gender impact assessments and gender equality action plans. And very shortly, you'll meet all of us again in a series of training sessions that will be delivered by us around gender equality action planning. And those plans are really the very significant document. All of your other work that you'll do in workplace gender auditing and gender impact assessment is really going to feed into your plans, your tailored plans for change towards a more gender equal future. And so we're here to help, and I'm here to give you an idea about what some of the tasks are that we're going to be doing together as part of this journey towards change. Before I begin, though, I just wanted to share with you why are we doing this? What's the significance of it? Why has government decided to create a Gender Equality Act? Let me just talk to you about some key statistics around the gender gap in Victoria. We still have a 10.9% gender pay gap in this state. So we've been saying and had legislation around gender equal pay since the 1970s, but we have not closed that gap. In mental health, we have a situation right now where young girls are making up 77% of the hospital admissions for self-harm in this state. And a significant reason for that is connected to gender inequities and the way that they are playing out in relation to young women's perceptions of their bodies, the way that they are being treated within a number of different social environments, including online, where they are being increasingly sexualised. And we are very concerned about the mental health impacts of women, particularly young women. In our state, 82% of the unpaid work that is done at home is done by women. And probably most concerningly for me, 68% of women want to take action to do something about this, but only 28% of men want to take action for gender equality in our state. To look at it at another level about why we're doing this, Australia is currently 50th in the world on the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Index. So that index, the most recent index, came out a couple of weeks ago. Australia was number 15th, so 15 in the world in 2006. There is no footy code in Australia that would allow such a huge drop in our gender equality performance. We have gone backwards. If we went backwards on the Olympic medal tally from, Athens to Tokyo, there would be a royal commission about why we dropped so many spaces. And what is the number one reason why we've dropped so many spaces? It's in the workforce. We educate women and girls, young women and girls, number one in the world. There's no gender inequality in our education system, according to the World Economic Forum. We're the best. But when our women go into the workforce, we drop down to the 70th in the world for equality, worse than where we are on the total list. So something is significantly going wrong, and the Victorian government looked to see who are the best performers in the world. And the best performers in the world are the Nordic countries, and something that they have in common is a Gender Equality Act, a positive obligation and responsibility to actually create a culture of gender equality in their communities and in their society. Now, we've been doing gender equality in Australia and in Victoria for a long time, and you're already doing so much of this work, but I want to explain to you what I see as the legislative and policy differences. So we have an Equal Opportunity Act, and you'll be very familiar with the duties that Equal Opportunity Act creates. It creates that duty for individuals to not be discriminated or experience sexual harassment or victimisation in their workforce, in their workplace. And we've asked individuals to basically take individual action to challenge that behaviour when it crops up, and we even give compensation and support those people in small ways when they take that action. The Equal Opportunity Act is important, but it's very individualistic process orientated. We have a Charter for Human Rights and Responsibilities Act, and there are obligations that governments at both the state and the local level have to make to ensure that their laws are consistent with civil and political rights like equality before the law, the prevention of torture and cruel and inhumane treatment, freedom of expression. And there are gender equality issues in that act as well, in that charter. But it's very much only related to the making of laws. It doesn't do anything else other than say, well, this law is inconsistent and you should go and try to make it more consistent with these principles. You also have workplace compensation, occupational health and safety. You've got your Public Health and Wellbeing Act. You've got family violence legislation, and you've got recognition of carers and a number of other pieces of legislation that provide a requirement to act for gender equality. But there was no piece of legislation that created an obligation or a legislative framework for organisations to act in a positive way to create gender equity. And that is what the Gender Equality Act is aiming to do. And so the government, only for defined entities in the public sector, because they're the organisations in which can manage to communicate and direct at this point, it has created three primary strategies to address gender equity: workplace gender auditing, gender impact assessments, and your gender equality action plans. Now, there are other things that the Commission for Gender Equality in the public sector will be doing, including looking after some gender equality issues in relation to industrial agreements. Those things I won't talk about today. I want to focus on the work that you're currently doing. So most of you should have had some training in relation to workplace gender audits. What does this mean? What are you doing at the moment? You are gathering evidence. Some of your organisations will be really advanced in your knowledge about your workforces. And a lot of the evidence, you'll already have it. You have it in your data collection. You know about how many men and women and gender diverse people you employ. You have data on which areas they work in. You know a lot about them. What you might not know is whether or not you have pay equity in your workforces. You may never have compared the incomes of all of your staff and looked for gender differentiation. And I think more significantly, I imagine many organisations have never considered gender segregation, where you have one gender, whether it's male or female, and I know that I'm being binary in this approach at this point, where there is a conglomerate of one gender as opposed to another. And in local government, for example, you might have at the depot significant numbers of male workers, and you might have in your admin support significant numbers of women workers. You need to look at, account for, and reflect on some of these issues for the first time in your workplace gender audits. So you're getting training in relation to how to do that, how to bring your data together. This is the first time you're doing it. The expectation from the Commission is not that you get it all right away. The second piece of your work that you're doing is gender impact assessments. This is where you're making determinations about which of your services, which of those services that you're currently providing directly and significantly impact on the public, and there's no decided way in which the law tells you what it means to be directly and significantly. So at the moment, it's a common sense approach. How are those gender impact assessments? How are you assessing those projects and programs for their gender impact? The Commission is running training again in relation to these aspects, but there's a common sense aspect to it. And it requires you to think about your policy programs and services and how they impact differently on people of different genders. It asks you to also look at people who look at gender from an intersectional perspective. And for those of you who are not familiar with that terminology, it means you have to look at other intersecting attributes of disadvantage and vulnerability, like race, ability, sexuality, religion. You have to look at those other intersecting attributes and also account for them in your work and also in your workplace audits. Your obligation to do the work, in terms of timing, the workplace gender audits, you don't have to have them done by a certain time at this point, because that data collection is to help you do your gender equality action planning. That's what the data's for. You're collecting data so that you can do your workforce action planning in what I call the JEETs. And I'll come back to those in a minute because we're having a fair degree to do with that. For gender impact assessments, you already have to do this now. So from the 31st of March, so it's already in force, your councils need to be thinking about how your programs and projects and services that directly and significantly impact the public, what is the gender differential impact on those services? And many of you won't have done that before. Again, the Commission is running training and development on that, and our organisation can also help with going through that process, and I commend you to do the training. Do not miss out on that training. It will be really useful to you. The training details are on the Commission's website. In a few weeks, there'll be a new set of training up on the website, and that will be for how to do gender equality action plans. And our group of services, the Action for Gender Equality Partnership, will be delivering that training directly to you. There will be 3 sessions for local government. There will be a gender equality action plan session for metro LGAs. There will be another session for organisations in the northwest, and there'll be a 3rd session in the southeast. And we'd love to see you in those sessions learning about gender equality action plans. I don't have the time today to go into all of the detail of how you do it. What I can tell you, though, little tip: believe in the beauty of persistent incrementalism, and come and see me and my colleagues at one of these forthcoming sessions. They will be up on the Commission's website very soon. I can stick around for questions. I know you'll have them. That's it for me. I've probably gone a little bit over time. I'm sorry about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanya. That was wonderful. You came through loud and clear from your car. That was, thank you for taking the time for that. I just found out Hannah's just been kicked out of Teams, unfortunately, so we're having a few technical problems. I might just move straight on to Leanne next if she's ready to present. We've got 3 more speakers to get through. Are you happy with that, Leanne?
Yeah, absolutely. And before I start, I'd also like to begin to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. I have got a presentation and I'm going to share that with you now, so just bear with me while I get that up. Really pleased with the introduction from Hannah and the context set by Tanya as well. I think that's going to complement my 10-minute prezzo. I think one of the things that I just wanted to point out is I actually only do have 10 minutes, and I'm trying to find that presentation as we speak. It's not coming up. That's what you don't want. Here we go. Let me know if you can see that, if someone could just acknowledge that that's... Yep, I see a thumbs up, which is fantastic.
All good, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. I think the I'm going to put that onto PowerPoint slideshow. I think the introduction and the detail provided by Tanya, it's almost like we spoke before we put our presentations together, and they're going to complement each other. I'm sort of going to jump into, whilst high level, a little bit of practical application. But what I thought I would do is just set the scene, because I think I'm a bit biased, but I think that Mono City Council has been amazingly progressive in this space. And the reason why we feel really confident and positive and welcome the legislation is because we've done a lot of the, the foundation building, if you like, and now we're overlaying that with some, buying in and committing to the legislation requirements. So I'm just going to set the scene, because I don't want anyone to think, oh, wow, we're sort of not at that stage. And I think setting that scene just gives a sense of where we've come from. But before I do that, I just wanted to acknowledge that the presentation that I'm going to run through is about how the Workforce Planning requirements as part of the Local Government Act and the Gender Equality Act requirements interact, and how they for us coexist and will coexist. And Hannah, you actually said early on that these are, it's not about doing two different things. These are about interdependencies and working together. We've got some aspirations for both. So for us, in terms of our workforce planning approach, very high level, it is around that skilled workforce and our culture, and how do we actually work towards our strategic priorities based on that workforce plan, but how does that then intersect with our aspiration around gender equality? And we've just got a little blurb there that's a summary of how we want to strengthen the opportunity to address the structural inequalities, whilst our actual gender audit, our workforce gender audit, has given us some really rich information, and we're identifying that we've got lots of structural inequalities, which was touched on by Tanya, particularly when we look at the workforces that sit in particular areas that might be either, and binary again, either male dominated or female dominated, and how do we tackle the unconscious bias and improve inclusivity for everybody. And that's just not for us in the community, but in the workplace. And what I love about the legislation is, there's a huge amount of work that we've been doing in the community over the years, but this really, puts the spotlight on what are we doing within the workplace as well. And I know, that's been really important to many of us as well. So I'm just going to move into the next slide. So I suppose for us, our journey started with the very fact that we had strong executive commitment. So our commitment was supported by, at the very top, the CEO level. There was support, courage, development of strategies, a big piece of research that was done, some partnerships and community focus. And I just think, just to give you a sense of our background, and I need to give kudos to our community strengthening team where this all started, Fee Harrison and Tracy Egan particularly, where we started some work around 2015 with a community-facing gender steering committee, and later with a gender advisory committee, and then some partnerships with Melbourne Uni and some research that was done around how do we actually understand the ways our workplace and our home life interact particularly around factors that influence health and well-being, and that's been a really important part of our research journey. It has been internally focused, but there's been a huge amount of work that's been community focused, and those coming together has been a really important part of that journey. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but just to give you a sense that we did actually have a really strong foundation in which to leverage. So that's been amazing for us as an organisation. And kudos to those that have been around longer and been a very key part of that. So if I just talk about our evolution, I think more recently, one of the things that I wanted to highlight is we focus on inclusive leadership. So if we want a culture of diversity and inclusivity, and one that actually does respond to the Gender Equality Act and what are the things that sit within that, we thought we need to start with our leaders. So we developed an inclusive leadership program that we ran across 2018 and 19, and that was done with an external provider. But what it did do was looked at what are the traits and capabilities required for our leaders to be more inclusive and to drive a culture of diversity. And that was something that we've embedded and linked back to our values as well. So that was been a really important part of the work that we've done so far and as part of our evolution. Some of the information that's driven the changes that we're making has been informed by not only our people and our community, but also through feedback through formal surveys, and we've done a range of those, and one of them was through that research partnership with Melbourne Uni that I just touched on. That actually supported us reviewing and renewing some policies, not just community-facing policies, but actually internal policies. And a couple of examples, we actually renewed our recruitment policy. And one of the key things around our recruitment policy was to think about how do we support gender balanced, or I actually say diversity balanced selection panels, shortlists. What are the things that we might be able to support in terms of blind recruitment? And there's lots of complexities around that, and I understand there's various research that supports, you know, both blind recruitment and not so. So we've actually unpacked and looked at that. We've got a flexible working policy that's been renewed and more recently renewed because of COVID. So it's been really important for us to take that lens, not just the workforce planning lens, but the gender equality lens, and really get into the nuts and bolts of that. The important part of our evolution has also been around governance, external facing, community facing governance, as well as internal governance. So we set up a gender equity steering committee in the organisation, and that was made up by expressions of interest across all levels of the organisation, and we've got a number of representatives, I think up to about 20, that's represented across the organisation from different levels, different parts of the divisions, and that's headed up by our Chief Executive, and it's sponsored by myself and our Community Area Director as well. So that's been a really important part of working towards the development of our Gender Equity Action Plan. They are actually very much supporting how we develop that up, as well as the workforce gender audit information, and of course the People Matter survey that's coming up that will give us that employee experience information. So we've had our evolution has been really about balancing the community and the workforce focus, and we've put our hand up, and we've got a range of pilots that we've participated in that's really set us up, put us in a really good position for our requirements around the Gender Equity Action Plan. More recently, we participated in the workforce gender audit, and that's really given us some head start around the analysation of all that data that we've got. So just moving in to the gender impact assessments, and I know this was something that was asked of us to talk a little bit about in terms of the panel, but really what I wanted to do was just highlight a few points. And when I saw this image, it just sort of gave me a sense of, when we first thought about gender impact assessments, I won't lie, we actually thought, wow, there's just so many elements, so many moving parts. But really, when you unpack it all, it's not really that hard. We've got all the tools available to us, which have been mentioned already. But the key points for us is when we talk about direct and significant, we didn't get caught up in it having to be defined and set for us. What we decided was, what does direct and significant mean to us, but using the information that's been provided. So we actually had our own take on what direct and significant means, but not losing sight of the purpose of the gender impact assessments and the overall Gender Equality Act. We've already touched on training, so it was really important for us to engage in the training that's available through the Commission, and actually looking at how we roll training out more broadly across the organisation. Again, leveraging the tools that are available to us, but developing up some of our own tools, looking at some of the tools that might be available to our, particularly those involved with developing those gender impact assessments. So we've developed up some templates and a couple of checklists. Some governance, I think I've already mentioned that we've got a steering committee, but we've got a governance committee as well. And that's really about making sure that any gender impact assessments are registered, that we can access them, that they'll be, in terms of governance, that they'll be sorted and filed and reported appropriately, particularly because we know we've got reporting in 2 years' time, and we want to be able to make sure that we can, look at those, analyse them and revisit them. I think the rest is pretty straightforward. The consultation, the alignment and the integration, and I've talked about the fact that the alignment integration is more than just workforce planning, but aligning it with all the other policies and service delivery requirements that we talk about. And that's been a really important part of our process, looking at this holistically, not looking at things in isolation. And I won't go through too much detail there. I'm more than happy for people to reach out to me directly to get the nuts and bolts and the detail, but I think that will give you some sense of just the amount of work we're doing in this space. So just to move on into our learnings, and I'm conscious of the time, but for us, and when I reflect on the learnings, it was easy for us to potentially panic, but what we kind of pushed the pause button and said, look, let's not panic, let's plan. And where we need to seek clarity and make sure that we're all on the same page, not just with our, external stakeholders, but also internally. Let's make sure that we've got the right people in the room, that we're talking the same language, and that we're actually aligned in terms of going forward. I've spoken about governance and making sure that we've got the proper frameworks in place to support us. The last thing we want as an organisation is for gender impact assessments to be happening all over the place and having no governance around that, and it being done differently across the organisation. So we've put that in play. Getting key stakeholder buy-in. So who are the people that we need to influence and drive and support what we're doing? And how do we actually use those, not just formal influences, but those informal influences across the organisation? We're currently outlining a training map, so we know we've got training available to us via the Commission and other means, but what's that mean for us in terms of bringing that training back to the organisation? And those supporting tools that I've mentioned, so checklists, frameworks, and I can't emphasise this enough, it's probably that old adage of communicate, but we're also, it's about consultation for us as well. And I think this has been something that's touched on. It's really around how do we make steady and sustainable progress. We're not trying to reinvent the world and tick, some box. What we're trying to do is drive sustainable change. And that we know is something that's going to take time. And whilst we want to get it right, we know that we actually are, we're on a journey and it's an evolution. And how do we prepare for that future reporting, particularly for our gender impact assessments in 2023. We are, just while we're on that, we are going to have some commentary around, where we're at so far in terms of our gender equity action plan and some commentary around that, but really how are we preparing to make sure that we can report for 2023. And just to sort of finish off, and I love that we went through this with Tanya earlier on. For us, it's not, we can't forget why we're doing this. It's just so important. And when I talk about communication, how do we bring that back into play all the time? So we're constantly thinking about ways that we can give this meaning It isn't about tick boxing. It isn't about having those templates filled out. It is about the why and what we're trying to achieve. And that's why we keep circling back to our aspirations and what's the why more broadly. So that's my bit of advice in a packaged up 10-minute spiel, but certainly open to questions, or for anybody that wants more information to reach out at any time, either via phone call and email. So thank you. I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Leanne. And are we going to Tony or Disa next?
That'll be me. So,
okay, Tony. Thank you.
So,
Ballarat.
Yes, it is. So I'm hoping everyone can see my screen. Yep, is that thumbs up? Thanks, Leanne. Firstly, I just want to acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land, the Wadawurrung people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend the respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I'd have to concur with the high-level drivers around the Gender Equality Act and also the Local Government Act that Tanya spoke about and Leanne. And I also would like to acknowledge that, being a representative from the Regional Council, is that the City of Ballarat were quite forward-thinking in this space, and I want to call out the kudos to those key drivers in the early days. Part of my conversation, you'll see some synergies, same approach and similar to Monash, but I actually wanted to make today's conversation tangible for those who are in a small shire or a council with maybe 1 or 2 people and who are panicking. So one of the things I just wanted to set the scene, and I'm cognizant of time, is that the differences between gender equity and gender equality, I think it's incredibly important to remember, to keep our eyes on the prize, is that to enjoy equitable distribution, we need to give more to others to make it a fair playing field. So I just want to call that out. And then I think the why, again, you'll probably see some synergies, so not to steal Leanne's thunder, and we didn't share presentations, but building and reinforcing practices in workforce planning. I think that's really important. Facilitate improvements and approaches to long and short-term activities. As I whiz through this presentation, I actually want to also spend time reflecting on the why and how it translated, and to try and not get too ambitious. I think it's important to keep things simple. And one of that was the reinvigoration of our Gender Equality Committee, and to really ensure that they are empowered and that we've taken a partnership approach, same as what Monash have done in terms of working with our engaged communities, and ensuring that as the custodian of the Gender Equity Committee is that I focus on our internal community, whilst access and inclusion and engaged communities can help support representing the external community. So I think it was really important to consider that, not to go it alone. And one of the things you should be really focusing on is reviewing any strategies and plans that you've got from an existing standpoint that touches JEDI. So anything around gender equality, diversity and inclusion. Think about activities, interventions, training, external data sources. Analyse, which is really where it dovetails nicely into workforce planning, is that where are you capturing your data from? Because you could be doing it through recruitment, you could be doing it through your HRIS, your applicant tracking system, you might have BI dashboards, or you might be operating on Excel spreadsheets. And you know what? That's cool, that's okay. You've got to start somewhere. And I think, just touching on to what Tanya mentioned, don't forget the important piece of work that we're driving around the gender lens is how future work is valued and remunerated. And there are industries or sectors that are highly binary dominant. So you'll have male and female, but how do you address that through your analysis? And that will start to inform your gender equity action plan. The next one is the what, is really start small and have a go. And that was sort of the key takeaways from the Commissioner's training, particularly around gender audit and GIAs. Have a go, don't panic, try and make a positive impact. So review those, identify the programs, services, policies, come together and just have a go at doing a GIA. Again, like Monash, we've put together some FAQs. We're starting to build out a community of practice. We're working with Women's Health Grampians under the Core Alliance network, and to ensure that when we do a GIA assessment, we're trying to capture it at the earliest stage of the design and development phase. So I think it's really important to focus where your efforts are placed, because you will find yourself wheel spinning and panicking, and there are people that you can talk to. So I just want to really let people know in the room here that there are some lucky councils, and I consider myself one of those, where a great body of work had been done and 5 priority drivers were identified, and a suite of action plans. And we're now reflecting on those, and we'll do the People Matter survey to ensure that our next GAP is informed. How we've done the GIAs, because I think that's the biggest hot spot, and the panel members were tasked to try and work through how it's integrated, is we've attended the Commissioner's training, and we've actually partnered with one of the Commissioner's preferred training providers. And we're actually, phase 1 for us is to provide practical lessons, and that we would be sharing of evidence and ideas and having a go. I mean, I think it's really important when you do a GIA, it's a checkpoint. It's, you know, at the moment, get in the early planning phase, work with key stakeholders. Similar to Monash, we've got a project control group for project-specific activities. We work ensuring it getting into that forum. We'll be working with governance and risk in terms that any major templates or any documentation that drives the early planning stage, GIAs are tabled along with risk assessments and privacy assessments. So the councils have done a lot of work. Don't recreate the wheel. Don't duplicate effort. Try and get in front of it. Even if you don't have a gender equity or gender equality committee, there are already committees operating. So it's about ensuring that you can work with those and really encourage empowering them rather than being a committee of silence. So I think it's about ensuring that your committee makeup is correct at the start. And then phase 2 is obviously we'll get really sophisticated around GIA libraries, where our community of practice and our hub will actually have a range of predetermined standard GIAs that staff members could download and start to localise to their projects or activities. And then it's about embedding in the GIA practices into ways of working. Similarly to Monash, is that we're maximising the management and leadership, and that's through leadership development training, that's through professional development, that's through coaching and mentoring, and ensuring that we've got good governance around that. So just as the last call out, I just want to say, work in very small manageable chunks. Don't duplicate effort. There's teams and resources out there that can help you. There are some key stakeholders who've already weathered the storm, but part of weathering the storm is that you'll have some really great learnings. And again, I'm also available if people want to reach out and really understand the finer details behind that. I've got lots of notes sitting behind this presentation, so I'm happy to share. So yeah, I'll stop sharing my screen and allow others to present their findings too.
Sorry, realised I was muted there. Thank you so much, Tony. We'll hand straight over to Disa as time is running out.
Great. I'll just share that.
Welcome, Disa.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. So I'm going to take a little bit of a different. Can everyone hear me? Sorry, I can't. All good? Can you hear me? Yeah, cool. Thanks. So I'm going to come from a little bit of a different angle today. I'm going to speak about some of our existing processes and mechanisms that we've used at Darebin City Council and talk about how we are looking to integrate the Gender Equality Act and yeah, some of the learnings so far. I guess I want to be clear that we're really at the moment in a process of reviewing many of our processes, and we it's by no means there's lots of things changing at the moment. So I just want to be really clear about that I might not have all the answers yet, but I can definitely share with you what I've learned so far. So before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land which Darebin sits and which I am right now, the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and also recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture. I thought it'd be useful just to provide a little bit of the policy context and a bit of our journey so far. So Darebin City Council has been really active in this space for quite some time. Our first gender equity strategy was developed in 2012. And since then, we've had a number of strategies, including currently the Gender Equity and Preventing Violence Against Women Action Plan. We also have a document called the Towards Equality Framework, and this is our equity, inclusion and human rights framework, and it brings together all of our kind of social justice commitments, and I'll touch on it a bit later. We've got some gender equity commitments in both our council plan and our municipal public health and wellbeing plans. So really, I guess one way of us embedding equity across the organisation and gender equity specifically is around looking at all those different policies and plans and levers where we can place it. So I just want to touch on the Towards Equality framework because you'll see this will be quite relevant for the discussion. So Towards Equality it was endorsed in 2019 and it's a 10-year strategy, brings together all of our social justice commitments, which is inclusive of our commitments to gender equity. It also restates council's legal obligations under human rights and anti-discrimination laws. And really at its crux, it's around how we be accessible, equitable, inclusive and responsive to the diverse needs of community, as well as staff, in recognition that our staff, our workforce is an extension of the community itself. So what I really want to spend today speaking about is the EIA, which is the Equity Impact Assessment, what we call it. And that's about how we bring our commitments to social justice and specifically the Towards Equality framework to life. And, as you can see, it's similar conceptually to the GIA. So it's been through quite a few iterations over the years. It actually began long before we had the Towards Equality framework, but this is kind of the way that we practically apply the Towards Equality framework. And it's, in essence, a mandatory organisational requirement for council's projects, policies, strategies, programs, services and processes. And it really seeks to prevent and address inequalities and discrimination, or at a minimum, make sure we're not compounding them. And it also helps us meet our legal requirements. So more recently, our requirements under the Gender Equality Act. So how it works is currently the process is actually that it's kind of a peer-to-peer discussion or brainstorm. So what generally happens is we have people from different areas, equity, access, inclusion, human rights, and our health and wellbeing areas, and they come together. So subject matter experts come together in a room, and the person responsible for the policy, service, program, project will provide a little presentation, and then we'll discuss some of those equity considerations. And so some of the outcomes we see from this is that, particularly since we've started in the last year, sort of doing this new format, that we've definitely seen a greater shift and focus on equity considerations across the organisation, and sort of has created a lot more linkages between business units. Often in the session, we're able to sort of point people to who they should be just talking to across the organisation. So, you know, if they are looking at a new facility, we'll say, well, you need to chat with traditional owners and make sure that they're being engaged in all the processes involved in that. And we've also seen that it's provided some professional development opportunities. So what we usually find is by the first time people will be bringing forward some equity considerations to them, and by the third time they've come to us and they've already considered those equity considerations. We have a sort of prompt sheet that we sometimes use to, I guess, prompt people and prompt ourselves, but really it's quite unstructured, and it really is about the subject matter experts sort of discussing and bringing different equity considerations to light. We've recently actually done a survey, only in the last couple of weeks. So I've actually been able to sort of have a look and really reflect on what's worked and what hasn't worked. And here are some of the reflections that people gave in the survey. So this person was doing some facility design, and they said that it, obviously informed some of those design considerations around creating spaces for neurodiverse people and places for breastfeeding. And this person this is, I guess, a little bit towards the community engagement side, but they identified some areas where they could improve their engagement and made them think more about those internal stakeholders that they could get in touch with. But we do see that there are some challenges, and these challenges are mainly kind of the reflections of us as a team. So we're seeing that it is quite time intensive, and we've definitely seen a larger volume of I guess, projects coming to us. So there is quite a big commitment from the team to be able to do all those EIAs. We're not really seeing, we don't have really a mechanism for accountability at the moment. So we don't necessarily know what's actions or if our recommendations are taken on, because there isn't really a good reporting mechanism currently. They are quite unstructured, which can be good for some people, but some people do prefer a lot more structure. So we're rethinking that component a little bit. It's also inconsistently applied. So while it is a mandatory obligation, it doesn't necessarily, there are projects that do slip through. And we also sometimes feel like it could be a little bit of a tick box exercise, and we definitely think there are ways to sort of improve and elevate it a little bit. And importantly, it doesn't quite fulfill the expectations of the Gender Equality Act in that it is currently more the responsibility of subject matter experts and not so much the officers themselves. So that is, as you've heard, it's quite important that the responsibility is really taken on across the organisation. So we're definitely looking to improve that component. So we've already heard about gender impact assessment. So as you know, when developing reviewing any policy program or service with a direct and significant impact on the community, councils must undertake a gender impact assessment. So in light of this, I guess I just wanted to kind of end on saying like what we're currently looking at changing and how we're looking at embedding the GIA into the EIA. And this is based off sort of some of the reflections that we have about the EIA. So obviously to further embed it into organisational processes to mean that no policies, programs, services fall through the cracks. All of them apply some form of equity impact assessment or gender impact assessment. We're looking at really mapping and understanding what's coming up so we can really plan ahead and prioritise those projects that will require a lot of work. Continue to review our existing process ongoing, and potentially introduce a tiered approach where we consider what projects have a large impact and maybe not so large impact and allocate resources accordingly. There's capacity for further professional development and capacity building through training. And what we might look at trialling is a sort of drop-in style workshop where subject matter experts maybe can support people to deliver their own EIAs. And that is all. And yeah, you're welcome to contact me. I know I kind of sped through a lot of those components, and there's a lot more to it. So feel free to get in touch if you want to know more. That is all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Disa. So look, I've been looking at the chat, and it's really great to see some good connections being made there, and the ongoing conversations across the sector about the great work that we've seen being presented today. We have pretty much ran out of time for questions, so. And there aren't any specific questions that haven't been responded to in the chat. So I would like to thank all of our presenters. I'd also like to sort of tail back to the beginning, where I didn't formally introduce you to Jim Barrett, who's new in our team. And comes from Darebin in the sector. As Sharon Redmond, who you'll all be familiar with, has moved on to Homes Vic, and we're currently in the process of recruiting to her role. But Jim has very capably stepped into the team, and already is a fantastic part of the team and making sure that everything keeps on rolling. So Jim's your primary contact at the moment in local government Victoria, so his details will be on the Engage Vic website if you need to get in contact with Jim, and also you'll have them through the invitation. Or no, you would have them on. Sorry, I'm just trying to remember when this was sent out. That's right. But thank you. Great presentations, really great work that's being done. Very exciting to see that happening. And thank you, Tanya, for giving that really good background into the why. That's such a useful and important point that is so important. We're not just doing things, we're doing them for a reason, and a very important reason. So really do appreciate that. So thank you all for